Okay, my name is Lawrence McGlynn, and you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by City Budget Director Sabrina Maynard and City Treasurer Jackie Dunn to provide our annual Budget 101 primer, because it's budget season, Denise. Lance Haver will report on CBS News and what I'm calling their shameful dereliction. And Denise Clay-Murray and I will discuss a little bit of the budget and perhaps a little bit of yesterday's education hearing. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. So what we're going to do here is get started with our interview that we recorded actually just a couple hours ago with Sabrina Maynard and Jackie Dunn. All right, we are with Sabrina Maynard, City Budget Director, and Jackie Dunn, City Treasurer. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Great, thank you.
So before we get into anything, tell us what a budget director and a treasurer do.
All right, well, I'll take the budget director part of it, and then I'll turn it over to Jackie. So as budget director, I have kind of four parts of city finance under me. We have our operating budget team, which is responsible for putting together the city's operating budget, which is how we do things like pay staff and buy pencils and buy certain vehicles, so sort of day-to-day expenses. I also have the capital team, which is responsible for essentially our infrastructure budget. So when we're making improvements to rec centers or maybe other capital sites, or we're buying really expensive fire apparatus, that is all done through our capital budget, and that requires borrowing. We typically borrow for those costs because we accrue the benefit over a long period of time. I also have the central grants office under me. So we sort of have, we as a city receive a lot of grants from different governments, and those grant streams are kind of closely tied but distinct from kind of our operating and capital streams. And so those teams work together. And then we have a policy and analysis unit that does a lot of policy and analysis as things come up from time to time from different stakeholders asking questions internally and externally about all the different financial things we do. So in my role, kind of air traffic control of all those different pieces.
Right.
Jackie to talk about the treasurer's office.
So you're where everything meets, basically. All the things we're going to talk about, that's you.
On the resource allocation side.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And Jackie, what is a treasurer?
Sure. So our office safeguards all of the city's funds, and we also manage the city's debt portfolio. So on the debt side of the house, we look for opportunities to refund debt. We structure debt in a way to reduce the city's borrowing costs. We manage the city's credit ratings to try and improve those and, again, lower our cost of borrowing. So that's on the debt management side of the house. And then on the safeguarding or being a custodian of the city's funds, we manage all of the banking and investment related services. So we provide the city departments with the banking tools and reporting that they need to collect revenue, to make payments, to track and do reporting. And then we also manage the city's cash on a short-term basis. So we have enough money to pay the bills each day, each week, but then also invest any excess funds safely to try and earn a return until we need those funds again.
Okay. So Sabrina, you had mentioned different parts of the budget. Can you tell us what they are and how they all fit together?
Sure. So our operating budget is essentially how we make sure we can pay our staff. So it includes salaries and fringes for all of our employees. So the biggest portion of our budget, like many municipal governments, most of what we do would not be possible without people. And so most of our expenses relate to the cost of having and sustaining a pretty substantial workforce, and then providing the benefits for that workforce. We also provide contracted services as a city. So maybe we have contracted providers, or we are paying for IT, or what have you. So we'll do kind of contracted services for different sorts of things. And that's kind of in every department. It looks a little bit different department by department, depending on the services they're providing. And then we buy materials and supplies. So everything from your kind of run-of-the-mill office supply items to things that are a little larger and more specific to municipal government. Like if you maybe on New Year's Day, if folks saw those sort of new barriers that are out on the streets. That was something that we purchased using kind of operating funds. And so we purchase a lot of objects as a government for all the different operations that we do. That is all on the operating side. And the idea for an operating budget is basically these are things you would not borrow money to do. It's kind of like buying groceries. You would not take out a mortgage to buy groceries. They're just costs that you kind of have on an ongoing basis. And if you fall behind on being able to pay for those things, you kind of can't sustain your operations. So you have to kind of keep that balanced over time. And we as a city we look at this annually to plan out each year's budget. And then we also do a 5-year plan with every one of our budgets. And we have to make sure that we're balanced in each of the years of our 5-year plan. So we're not bringing in more money than we anticipate spending. And so this is how we kind of maintain our financial operations and ensure that we're doing long-term planning. On the capital side, as I mentioned earlier, that's really tied to kind of longer term infrastructure investments. So for something to be capital eligible, there's a series of rules. Those rules include things like it has to be at least $15,000. It has to have a useful life of at least 5 years. And the idea is for capital items, we can justify borrowing money to pay for those items because the benefit is accrued over a really long period of time. So that's more akin to taking out a mortgage as opposed to on the operating side where we're just kind of we're getting tax revenue in, we're paying tax revenue out and the revenue as well to kind of sustain our operations. The interplay between both capital and operating is what we call debt service, which is basically the ongoing costs sort of paying the equivalent of our mortgage, the equivalent of paying for our infrastructure costs. And so on the operating side, we have money set aside to pay down those bonds over time. And so that's really the interplay. So we can't borrow more than we're able to sustain on the operating side. And that's how the two pieces really fit together.
Okay. How does the city choose capital projects? What is that process like?
Yeah, so I think there's a sense out in the world that the budget process starts when the mayor delivers a budget address in the beginning of March. We actually start our budget process in September. And so in September, we send out something we call the capital call. We ask departments that receive infrastructure funding sort of what their plans are for the next 6 years. We look at a 6-year timeline when we're talking about capital, both with sort of money that's programmed for them and in our existing capital plan, and then if they have any new requests. We then meet with them during the fall to kind of walk through their requests. And we always receive this many requests and have this much to play with. And so we go through a process of looking at maybe we've made prior year commitments to things. So those are sort of things that we start with. Maybe there are legal requirements we have to fulfill as part of our investments. And so we start with the things that we sort of have to do. And then within that, we figure out how much room we have left. And we go through a process with departments and with the mayor's office to develop essentially a recommended plan. That plan needs to be approved by the Planning Commission before it can be introduced in City Council. And then it is part of our kind of universe of budget legislation.
Now, one of the things that I have a lot of trouble with, and this is partly because I was an English major, and the math I took in college was math without numbers, specifically for English majors. How do you conceptualize $7 billion? Because that's what we're talking about with the operating budget, almost $7 billion. But how do you even wrap your mind around that and then determine what those allocations look like?
Yeah. So every time we give budget presentations, we try and show things in multiple ways because we have people who think in charts and tables, and then we have people who think in narrative. And so we try and display things in a lot of different ways. I think for me, I think in tables. So I think kind of item by item, bucket by bucket, what's baked in, what do we have to decide on each year? So many of our costs are fixed. So the amount of money that we actually talk about changing from year to year is a relatively small portion of the overall puzzle. And so when we're putting together the budget, we're really kind of focusing on that discretionary piece from year to year, which makes it a lot more manageable to conceptualize $7 billion. But those are some of the considerations we take into account. But yeah, it's a lot to kind of take in, and a lot of it is already kind of baked before we even start the process.
Right, because you only have about that much to play with. It always seemed like, a lot of things are already accounted for.
Yeah.
So you said that you start putting this together in September of the previous year. Is that when you reach out to various city departments and say, okay, what are your needs going to be? And then you start to analyze that?
Yep. So we issue a call. We give departments maybe a month or so to put together their requests. We then meet with every department to walk through their requests. And then we kind of synthesize all of it. So there are kind of, for like month long increments, things kind of move along. So pieces are sort of happening on an ongoing basis. And then we get to a point where we have everything and we understand some of what our constraints are going to be. And then we're able to figure out how we can move forward.
And a lot of this is based on projection too, right? What we think is coming in, what we think we can afford to spend.
Yep. When we look at the operating budget in particular, we are constrained by what we think we're going to bring in taxes. So every year when we start to figure out how much money we're going to have as part of a budget, we actually meet with an outside economist. That outside economist sits down with us and says, okay, we think this is what's going to happen with the wage tax next year, the year after that. We then we do that for all of our taxes. We have a couple of meetings where we iterate based on what we think is going to happen. And then we actually present at a meeting at the Federal Reserve Bank with regional economists. And we say, regional economists, this is what we were thinking related to our upcoming taxes. And we get input from that group. And then we use that input to develop what we think our growth rates are going to be. And so the growth rates then determine how much money we think we're going to have in each of the years of our 5-year plan. And then that dictates how much room we'll have to make new investments.
So there are a lot of checks on this. There's a lot of different people who are taking a look at it and getting an idea of it. That's interesting. Yeah. I've always wanted to know this, and maybe this is a stupid question, but that's okay.
No stupid questions in budgeting.
For Jackie, what is it like? What happens when you actually pay the city's bills? Is it like what I do with a checkbook? How does it work?
I'm not sure your process, but yeah, so every week we have a payroll and we also have payments to vendors. So we tend to pay most folks electronically. So people have submitted their banking instructions to us, but it's really a weekly process for us. It happens quite routinely, but as you can imagine, like Sabrina said, we're in contact with her office and the finance department throughout the year because we need to understand the amount of money is needed to make those payments. And we receive tax revenue in varying amounts at different times of year. So it's not like an even, distribution, because most people are paying their taxes around tax time. Other things come in quarterly. Some things come in every week. So the tax revenue comes in unevenly, whereas payroll and usually payments to vendors are going out at a regular cadence. So we try and match up those two things, which is really called like cash flow management. So on the personal level, it would be like you trying to figure out when to pay your mortgage or loans or auto bills and things like that, and syncing it up with when your payday is, right? So that you have money to make those payments. So we do that on just a much bigger scale with the payables that the city has.
Okay. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. When people talk to us about the budget and about what they think money should be spent on, and they say stuff to us like, well, you could put more money here if you wanted to, or you could put more money there if you wanted to. Can you do that? Is that realistic to think? And do you think that that's among the things that people don't quite understand about how a city budget operates?
Yeah, I mean, so we as a city have a lot of fixed costs. So the things that we sort of have to pay from year to year, a lot of that is like kind of locked in before we do the budget. So the amount of money that we actually have to play with from year to year for new investments is sort of in this range. And I'll say like the requests we get from departments are in this range. And so unfortunately, we don't fund a lot of requests, but that's not because we don't think they're a good idea. It's because we really do have limited resources as a city because we have a lot of legacy challenges. I mean, every mayor, when they come in, has a vision for sort of how they want to use the limited resources that we do have. And so we have to make decisions about kind of where we want to prioritize given the resources that we have. But yeah, I mean, there are opportunities to make investments in lots of different areas.
Now, you had the money that was taken out in bonds to help the residents of Kensington and try and solve the substance abuse problem there. You also have the home plan, and there's money that's going to be taken out for that, bonds that are going to be issued for that. Does that change anything you do with the budget, or is that money so specific to those programs that that's where it goes and that's where it stays?
So I'll start and talk a little bit about kind of how we think about how much we can afford to borrow, and then maybe Jackie will talk a little bit about kind of how we think about using bond dollars. So we're talking a little bit earlier about sort of when we borrow money, we have to allocate money in the operating budget to be able to pay down the debt service over time. So it's kind of like a mortgage. You don't want to borrow more than you can afford to pay on a monthly basis. And so we account for that in our budget. So when we do something like the home plan or we make investments at Riverview, we are accounting for what we think the debt service is going to be for those investments on the operating side. And then we bake that in as a fixed cost moving forward. So that's sort of layered in when we build our budget.
Yep. And then to build on that, to answer your question, the bond ordinances, whether for Riverview, that was part of the general obligation capital plan that Sabrina was speaking about earlier. For home, there was a special set of hearings because we're borrowing for that specific program, but the usage of the bond dollars is governed by what's in those authorizing legislations. So the end use of the dollars has to conform or has to comply with what's listed in that document. And so that's often why there's a lot of healthy back and forth to make sure we get that right, because that's what locks us in, or that's the parameters that the departments that are executing those programs or those initiatives have to follow once we issue the bonds.
Now, when you all get together with all the departments and you tell them that you can't give them everything they want, but you can give them some of what they want. I know that sometimes when you're, when you come to someone and you say, hey, I would like to do this or that, and they only allow you to do a certain amount of that, but not all of it. I guess, how does that conversation get approached? Do folks just say, look, this is what we have, this is what we can give you, and we can try and figure out how to get the rest, but we can't do that now? Also, what happens if in the case of the home plan, council has other ideas? How do you manage that within the budget?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about sort of how we work with departments. I get to do a depressing intro basically every one of our budget meetings where I talk about our constraints. And unfortunately, many of our constraints are just things that have been legacy challenges for us. I mean, we have a high poverty rate, we have high fixed costs, we're both a city and a county. And so we'd like to make sure that departments kind of have some insight into our world a little bit as we sort of think about the budget. We want to make sure that they kind of have that information. And we really encourage departments to be creative wherever they can to figure out how we can fund things. So sometimes maybe they'll come to us with an idea and we'll be able to make a connection that, well, actually, maybe this is a revenue generating idea. And so we can offset the cost. And so we really try and work with departments to figure out within what we have, what it is that we are able to do. And then just, can you reiterate sort of your second question about the bond piece? Just make sure we understand.
Well, when council was presented its original bond ask for the home program, there was something that the administration asked for, and yet council did something else. It decided that it wanted to add more money to the initial ask and where it wanted it to go. How do you figure it out within the budget when council says this is what we want and this is what we're going to do, and it does it? How do you figure that out within the budget?
Yeah, so we have kind of points during the year where we have conversations and negotiations with city council. So for the budget generally, I would say when we propose a budget, we know that's not the final budget. We have conversations with city council towards the end of the hearing process, and then we figure out kind of what the final budget looks like, and there are often things that get added as part of that agreement. When we propose other legislation, we know that that's our proposal, I would say for home, the total is still the same. So we're still looking at the 800 million that we had proposed initially, but the pieces that had shifted were sort of allocations and amounts by year. And so we were kind of doing those conversations within the parameters of kind of the overall size of the program. And we understand that what we propose is a proposal, and there'll be additional conversations that come out of those that proposal.
Now, do you work with council's budget director at all, at the beginning of the process so that there's not these kinds of questions at the end of it?
Yeah, we work closely with our colleagues in city council. I know they have technical staff. We have a lot of conversations with technical staff. But ultimately, the members of council have to vote. So we work with them and we provide information, and we like to make sure that we're responsive to all of their requests, and we maintain dialogue. But understand that sometimes things shift, and in order to get legislation passed, you have to have votes from council members. And so we maintain those areas of dialogue, but know that what we propose is just rarely the final version.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. I'm going to give you back to Lawrence McGlynn, our co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Before I let you both go, two quick things. First of all, are there going to be budget town halls this year where people can come out and talk to you and let you know what their priorities are?
Yep. So we will have a town hall in every council district, as we have for the last 2 years. So we'll be coming to a neighborhood near you. That will all be posted through. We'll have communications go out about that, and encourage folks to come out and hear about some of the things that will be in the proposed budget, and have an opportunity to ask questions of senior folks across the administration.
And other than watching this interview we just did, what are some of the things people can do to be prepared to come to a meeting like that, to have that conversation with you, and to understand the process really well?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. Finance issues a lot of reports. So if you're interested in our finances, we issue a quarterly report. We actually had one come out yesterday, where we provide updates on our finances 45 days after the close of every quarter. We provide updated estimates for all of our taxes, all of our expenditures. Performance measures are in there, service leave usage is in there. We provide a lot of information. So if folks are kind of interested in that, it's in there in a lot of budget schedules. And there's also there's a narrative intro. So if you don't want to see the budget schedules, you can kind of look at the summary and the narrative intro. We also produce a number of documents as part of the budget process. So I'd say if you're sort of interested in learning more about the budget, when the mayor gives her budget address in a few short weeks, we will also release a number of documents. I'd say the one that might be of most interest to folks is our 5-year plan. It's somewhere in the 800 to 1,000 page range document, and it has narrative detail for every city department, performance measure detail for every city department. We provide overviews of our taxes and our expenditures and our the status of our finances overall. We'll have executive summaries in there of the key takeaways for the budget. So I would say would not expect everybody to be interested in every piece of it, but if there's a part of the budget that you're interested in, definitely find that document, and focus in on the section you're interested in. So maybe you're interested in a particular department, you can learn about what they're doing. We provide a lot of narrative detail and pictures too. There'll be pictures in there of some of the great things we've got going on.
All right. Well, Sabrina Maynard and Jackie Dunn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you both.
All right, we'd like to thank City Budget Director Sabrina Maynard and City Treasurer Jackie Dunn for joining us on the show. And they're going to come back and see us again at the end of the budget cycle to talk a little bit about how things ended up. And so we'll have another interview with them probably in June. So Denise, it is February 18th.
Yes.
We're probably 3 weeks away from the mayor's budget address, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What stands out to you around this time of year when we start to get in the budget?
Well, I think what stands out to me is people suddenly trying to figure out what they want as an ask, what is important to them. Council is taking up more issues like um, property taxes and different things. And those are kind of the things that we're going to see when we talk about the budget. I'm still wondering what Mayor Parker's big ask is going to be. Because as you know, from the last years we've covered the budget, she has had a big ask in each budget. The first year, it was the Riverview project for substance abuse. The next year, it was the home program. I'm interested in seeing what this year's big ask is and how much of a big ask it's going to be, whether or not it's going to be a bond issue, and what those bonds are going to be used for. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm also looking to see what's going to happen with the community gun violence grant program. And I know that's not the right name for the program, but I'm interested in seeing what happens with that, because since its inception during the Kenney administration, the program has had really, really strong successes and really, really problematic failures. And over the weekend, I read a story about NOMO, new. I cannot remember what NOMO stands for, but it's a community program that's based in North Philadelphia, and it got $1 million from the city from this grant program right off the bat. And unfortunately for them, it was found that this money either wasn't being used correctly, or there was one program they had to cut, their affordable housing program, because they didn't have the money to cover it. And the people who were in that program, who were benefiting from that program, either had to be placed in another program or they had to move back home with their parents. So I'm interested in seeing what happens with this particular program. Are they going to place more regulations on it? Is there going to be more oversight? Are they finally going to put in place the mentors for these nonprofits, many of whom were operating, hand to mouth before they started getting city money? Are the mentors who were supposed to be in place to help folks understand what this grant program could and could not do and how they could spend that money, are they finally going to get these mentors? Because I think that the more you keep seeing stories about places where this program has gone wrong, the more of a chance you have people calling for it to be abolished. And like I said, while there are some spectacular misses in this program, there have also been some really good hits. There have really been, places where people who had anti-gun violence programs have gotten to use that money, expand what they do, and do it so well, it's helping the city's level of gun violence and homicide go down.
Yeah.
And, so I'm hoping that is a part of the budget, that they actually get the mentoring part for this program in place, so that there is somebody there that can really help these nonprofits understand exactly what you can and cannot do with this money.
Do you think, getting back to the potential ask from the mayor, year one, $100 million, year two, $800 million, for a total of $900 million. Do you think this year she says, well, we're not going to make a big ask like that, and maybe come back a year or two from now?
To me, that would make sense. It would make sense. I mean, you've got $900 million over 2 years in bonds. You've gotten approval to make these asks. There is such a thing as going to the well one too many times. And when you have almost $1 billion that is already sitting there that you're going to have to pay back with, in the case of the home program, $25 million in interest every year until it's paid off, council may not be in the mood to take on another debt. It may say, we understand that there are things that the city needs and things that, really big programs that the city needs to put together to do certain things, like to deal with homelessness, to deal with poverty. There are things we really need to do, and there's big asks we understand that you need to make here. But we may not have to find another way to finance your ask than taking out another set of loans, because we are close to $1 billion in loans right now.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get to $1 billion in loans, or even over $1 billion in loans, there are taxpayers who are going to leave the city, because we're going to have to get that money to pay that back somehow. And because we are the second poorest big city in America, you have people who legitimately cannot afford that.
Right. Right. So a timeline right now, as I see it, in a couple weeks, less than a month, we'll have the mayor's budget address. And then there's a little bit of period of inactivity, because that gives everybody time to go through the budget. You need some time to do that. And then once we get to April and May, you'll start to see budget hearings. Different departments come out. The first hearing is always the administration talking about what they want to do in the budget, what their main goals are, kind of like an overview. And then the departments come out. And not always every department, but most departments will come out and testify, especially the bigger departments. District attorney, sheriff, register of wills, they'll all come out and testify as well, because their budget comes from this fund. And we'll have a couple months of that. The budget historically has been passed the last session or the penultimate session of council, but it usually goes right until the end. But I don't ever remember it not passing before the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 30th. There are a lot of problems if that doesn't happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And then PICA approves it. It happens over the summer, but usually it's a pretty smooth process to get to that. I don't have any reason to believe it won't be this year. So, but when we get to those budget hearings, that's kind of what we live for. the budget hearings. Yeah.
Well, because when the departments come in, and I hope this time that the departments come in better prepared than they have been the last two budget cycles.
Yeah.
Because there is one phrase that plays over and over in my head at these budget hearings because of this lack of preparedness, which is, can we send this to you?
Yeah.
And one thing that the former teacher in me goes nuts when she hears is, can I get this to you later? You knew when the deadline was. You knew when this assignment was due. You knew when it had to be prepared. Why is it that I have to wait for you to give me something that you should already have done? If I'm coming in to talk to you, and I am the superintendent of schools, or I'm the chief, or I'm the police commissioner, or I'm the chief of staff for the mayor's office, I should know exactly, I should be able to answer any question you have for me on my budget request.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case here. And you see a frustrated city council as a result.
And honestly, if you're coming into these budget hearings, you're a department head, you should have an idea of what they're going to ask. Because, you know what your department does. You know what they've asked about in the past. They're going to want to follow up on things. But I'll never forget, Denise, there was one year, must have been about 5 years ago, maybe a little more than that, actually. Department came in. I think it was Councilmember Jamie Gaudier asked a question. Can you tell me a little bit about this thing right here? And the answer was, I'm sorry, I didn't bring a copy of the budget with me.
Yeah.
It was one of the most stunning things I've ever seen in local government.
I think that all of us members of the press who were present, when that was said, all of our jaws just dropped away.
I was stunned. And I I never saw that person again who said that. I never saw him
Gee, I
again.
wonder why.
Yeah, yeah. So you can't go to your budget hearing and not have a copy of your budget. So to any department head who's watching, please make sure you bring your budget to the budget hearing.
The dog may have eaten your homework, but don't tell council that.
No, that was crazy. Before we move on, I just want to touch on something really quick. We're going to talk more about this next week. Lisa Haver is going to be on with us to talk a little bit about this education hearing that happened yesterday about school facilities. But let's just take a minute here. What really stood out to you, Denise? Was there anything in there that you think, if we were to just have to tell people one or two things, what would they be about this hearing?
Well, the program, the facilities report is going to be presented to the school board on February 26th. If I were a Philadelphia taxpayer who had a kid in school, I would make sure I was at the school district building that night, because then you'll get to see the whole report in detail. Unlike what the school district of Philadelphia brought to council yesterday, there was not a lot of detail. And there's when I'm sitting there and I'm watching a council hearing, I take a look at the room. I took a picture of council members Jamie Gaudier and Isaiah Thomas, who are the Isaiah Thomas is the chair of the education committee, and a lot of the schools that are slated for closure or for moving around are in the 3rd Councilmanic District, which is represented by Gaudier. And the two of them were in this picture. The superintendent, Tony Wadlington, was saying something about the closings, and the two of them were looking at him like, meet us outside.
Yeah.
That was just the look on their face. And the thing is, you can't come into a room. First of all, council has already let you know that several council members are not happy with these proposed closings. They've already let you know that. They've let you know that because some of the schools that are closing are actually pretty good schools. Like, for example, Lacanau Motivation. That school has like a 99% graduation rate, and they are talking about closing it. You have some of these schools who are in neighborhoods that already had schools closed in the last round of school closings. And then my personal favorite part of the whole discussion, which was when Dr. Tony Wadlington told this group of council members, many of whom are Black and brown, that of course any school closings were going to disproportionately, impact Black and brown kids. That's most of the school district. Why are you surprised by this? And Jamie Gaudier said it best, and I'm paraphrasing here, when she said, we shouldn't be okay with the fact that that is the fact.
Right.
And I think that, like I said, if there's anything that people need to know, is that this gets presented February 26th. And you need to be there to make sure that A, you know what's going on, and B, your voice is heard. Also, the school district is having town hall meetings. You might want to pop into a few of those.
Yeah. And what I'll say about it is, this is what stood out. Two things stood out to me. Sort of piggybacking off your point, the school district had answers for some of these things, but council didn't feel like the answers were good enough for why some of these schools are closing and what could happen down the line. That was very clear to me. The other thing is they gave us paperwork, and we're going to have this in the newsletter this week, that broke down by council district what funding is going where and for what school and which schools are closing and all that. And I think that's illustrative of kind of where the priorities are, right? Mm-hmm. Now, you can take some of it with a little bit of grain of salt, because maybe, I think like Dobbins, which is the technical school. They didn't get a lot in this cycle here of money, but because they got a lot years ago, a few years ago. So there are some things like that, right? But it gave you a clear picture of sort of where the priorities are, and I don't know that anybody was happy with that, except the people who the 9th district got a lot of money. They got the most out of anybody, and it's only a coincidence that's where the mayor's from. I'll just say that. I'm sure the school district didn't even know that. But that's, there are some questions about how this money is being allocated, and I'm not so sure that the school closings that we see on that list right now are the ones that end up being closed necessarily. And I'm not sure that the way the money is allocated is how it stays. I feel like this is maybe a little bit of an ongoing thing. I could be wrong. I'm not certain, but it seems to me like there could be some moving pieces here. Specifically,
as Council President Johnson told them, we are not a rubber stamp.
Absolutely. And the thought, or the I don't want to call it a threat, but the suggestion that, we hold the purse strings here. So maybe when it comes to budget, we need some things to change for us to consider, making sure you get everything you need. So it's going to be interesting to watch. And that's going to happen pretty quick, Denise. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have at least a better idea of what's happening, I feel like. So Lisa Haver is going to be on to talk to us about that next week. So we'll wait for that. We'll be excited to see that. But now we have Lance Haver to come on and tell us, Lance, this story that I don't know what's happening to CBS. It used to be.
Before we talk about that, I wanted to thank you for bringing on the budget director. I don't think people understand that when they put out their numbers, we're going to see how much they expect real estate taxes to go up. And I know you and Denise are going to report on this, that numbers aren't there, but those of us who are concerned, and I know Council Member Lozada is concerned about it, but those of us who are concerned about who can stay in their homes and who can't, when you report on what the projections are for the increase or decrease of real estate taxes, we're going to have a sense of what's going on, because we know that the center city buildings have lost value. And we know that they're so valuable, even though they've lost value, that they can hire lawyers to go to the tax review board and get their assessment reduced. What we don't know is whether the city is going to do another citywide reassessment. And we don't know what that's going to mean. But you'll be able to tell us that when you look at those numbers and when you ask those questions. So I know Denise has said this time and time again, but budgets really are moral documents. They really do tell us where the priorities are. And that does give me the segue into what I wanted to talk about, which is how do we know what's going on and how difficult it is? The city of Philadelphia, when I moved here in 1978, had 5 daily newspapers. We're down to 1. I know that the Daily News is still published, but the Daily News is the same as the Philadelphia Inquirer. And the Inquirer continues to shrink. While there are great reporters there, there's a huge problem because there are fewer and fewer of them. And the news media continues to shrink. The newsrooms in almost every industry, in almost every place, continues to shrink. I know Denise spoke about this last week or 2 weeks ago. Pittsburgh has lost its daily newspaper, that the owners of the paper decided that they were going to bust the union and ignore the court order by simply closing the door. So the city of Pittsburgh no longer has, in the county of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, no longer has a daily newspaper. And that's one of the reasons why we formed Hall Monitor, was because we saw time and time again, the reporting of the news got smaller and more narrow, and it became harder and harder for citizens to participate in our own government. What we're now watching, though, is in some ways even worse. It's not just that the news media is getting smaller and there are cuts in the newsrooms and newspapers are closing. We're now looking at how President Trump and other despotic leaders are forcing news people to report the news the way that they want them to. And while I know that sounds harsh, and I know there are people who don't agree, I'm going to ask people to, for a second, try not to think about President Trump as being ignorant or not smart, and try and look at how skillful he has been at forcing the news to report the way that he wants to. And the easiest example of that is CBS. Now, CBS was where 60 Minutes was where Walter Cronkite was for many years, the most important, most trustworthy news organization in the country. Now it's completely sold out to President Trump's demands. If we can call up the slideshow, thank you. So why has this happened? I know you and Denise know this, Larry, but I'm not sure how many people recognize how skillful President Trump and the people around President Trump were at manipulating their people that they put in office and in head of the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, to get somebody to report the news that they wanted. It wasn't enough to have Fox News. It wasn't enough to have the other news. They wanted one of the big three networks to also be their spokesman, somebody who wasn't associated with them to also now be under their thumb. So President Trump sued CBS, and the claim was so ludicrous that the Knight Foundation, the Knight First Amendment Institute, writes that the reason why CBS settled this must be for reasons outside the four corners of the law. And that's fancy word for saying they had no chance of winning. Trump couldn't have won this lawsuit. He was suing because he said 60 Minutes edited an interview with Vice President Harris incorrectly. It didn't hurt him. He won the election, so he has no damages. And even if he had lost the election, he wouldn't have been able to point to damages, which is what you have to do to win these type of suits. But the reason why they settled, the reason why they gave President Trump, and again, this is a corporation, why did they give President Trump $16 million? And the explanation is simple. The owner of CBS, Paramount, had an $8.4 billion merger pending before the Federal Communications Commission. And Trump's appointed FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, put that approval in jeopardy when he reopened a dubious news distortion investigation into the Harris interview. Now, that's not what I say. That's what the Knight First Amendment Institute says. Knight is from Knight Ridder, the news organization that owned many newspapers in the United States, has sold most of them off at this point. But so Trump used his appointment at the FCC as a way of forcing CBS to pay tribute to Trump. And it wasn't just money. If it was just money, maybe that wouldn't be so bad, but it's not. What did CBS owners receive? Earlier this year, the news chief and top executive of 60 Minutes resigned as the network was talking about settling the case. Paramount's previous owner paid the $16 million payment. And as a result, the owner of CBS, Shari Redstone, was able to sell CBS to the Ellison family and get through the federal antitrust review. So now the Ellison family, which is a software company and owns many, many parts of different parts of our economy, is able to now own CBS. And what did Trump get out of that? He got Colbert, who is a very well-known late-night TV host, to have a news interview pulled. He was interviewing a candidate for United States Senate in Texas, and he interviewed it, and then the CBS lawyers, the people who are working for Ellison, said he couldn't show it. And as a result, they said, well, we're concerned that if we show this, we're going to run afoul of what's called the equal time, that provision that they're going to have to give opposing candidates when an interview on news is broadcast with one candidate, there's supposed to be equal time for the other. Of course, Brendan Carr from the FCC never challenges Fox News for this. And as Colbert himself said, we looked and we can't find one example of this rule being enforced for any talk show interview, not only for his entire late night career, but for anyone's late night career going back to 1960. Not only did they get Colbert to cut the interview, and of course that backfired on him because he simply put it on in a way on the internet that got much more attention than had they just let it be broadcast. So in that case, it really didn't work. I'm sorry, let me stop right there and make sure we're getting through with this, because apparently my computer has decided to do something that I don't really know why.
Okay.
So, all right, seems like we're kind of
All
there.
right.
So 60 Minutes, after the people who were running it resigned, and after they put a new person in charge, all at Trump's behest, they killed the story. CBS News editor-in-chief Barry Weiss pulled a planned 60 Minutes investigative segment centering on allegations of abuse at the El Salvador detention center, where the Trump administration sent hundreds of Venezuelan people. So this was a horrible, horrible news story exposing tremendous problems. And Trump's forcing CBS to be sold and allowing it to go through to his supporters allowed him to reach down and kill a story that it was exposing how his program to move people from the United States to these prisons was inhumane and should be illegal. But that's not the other thing that he got. He got favorable coverage from 60 Minutes. And this is an example of when the news media doesn't ask questions. This isn't that they pulled a segment. In some ways, this is even worse because the segment that was pulled from 60 Minutes ended up again on the internet. And on the internet, it exposed not only how horrible the jail was, but it exposed the heavy hand of the new Trump-assisted people running 60 Minutes. But this was an interview that happened last week, and it was an interview with RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Bobby, as they call him. And Bobby is now, after years and years and years of being an environmentalist and running for president of the United States as an independent and someone who has said he wants to make America healthy again, was asked to show up and talk about the food in America and how much was overly processed and what people should eat that's healthy. Now, there was a quick question about vaccinations, and I'm not going to talk about that because that really doesn't say anything. What I'm going to talk about is what they didn't ask Bobby Kennedy. Now, Bobby Kennedy has been one of those people who says the reason why he had to fire everyone at his department, HHS, was because they were all captured by the industry. The reason why you can't trust what they say about vaccinations is because the people who make vaccinations have too much control. So he fired everybody and he put his people in. But the 60 Minutes interviewer didn't ask Bobby Kennedy Jr. what he thought of the Trump administration hiring the former American Soybean Association lobbyist to serve as an administrator overseeing what pesticides can be used. Never asked him that. The importance of the question is the decision that the lobbyists made was exactly what the soybean growers wanted. The decision was to overturn the courts and allow a pesticide, dicamba, to be legal again. And the reason for this of importance is this is a pesticide that's sprayed on crops that evaporates and moves from one crop to the other. Now, Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer, has genetically modified plants so that the pesticide doesn't affect them. But because the pesticide drifts and gets into the water supply and goes to the next crop, it hurts everyone downstream, something that Bobby Kennedy Jr., as an environmentalist, has opposed. 60 Minutes didn't ask him about that. President Trump has sided with Roundup. Roundup, as we now know, is a carcinogen, been found to be a carcinogen in state courts. The owners of Roundup, Bayer, has gone to the United States Supreme Court and asked that all state courts be barred from accepting lawsuits. Bobby Kennedy, when he was running for president as an independent, if we can just move that slide forward, I don't seem to have control of it. Thank you. He was one of the people who bragged about that he exposed Roundup as a carcinogen. You can go to his website, it's still up there, when he was running for president. But they didn't ask him about that. They didn't ask him, well, if Roundup's a carcinogen and it spreads and it's in every part of our crop system, how can food be safe if Roundup is a carcinogen, and how do you justify allowing Roundup to continue to be used? And when President Trump decided that he was going to end the 2009 endangerment finding about air pollution from fossil fuels and decide that it was no longer a public threat to the public health and welfare, RFK Jr. wasn't asked about that. Now, again, if you listen to RFK Jr., when he was an environmentalist, when he was an independent candidate, he said, I have a personal belief that the climate crisis is real. And this is a direct quote from him. We have poisoned every freshwater fish in North America through mercury discharges from coal-burning power plants. The high peaks of forests are gone because of acid rain. Now, 60 Minutes didn't ask him about that. They didn't say, well, how can you justify talking about eating less processed food when the food that is available is going to be poisoned? And this is what I'm talking about. It's not just that a story is pulled, because that's obvious. When a story is pulled, we all know it. When Colbert is not allowed to run an interview, we all know it. But when we see what appears to be an investigative report on 60 Minutes questioning RFK Jr., but we don't see what they don't ask, that's really where you can see the influence, and you can really see the power of what Trump's getting away with. So I think we have to realize that organizations like Hall Monitor and other independent news organizations have to take up the slack, because as the newsrooms get smaller and smaller and the big industries get more and more corrupt, because billionaires apparently don't want to lose a few $100 million, which again is hard for most of us to understand. How many yachts do you need? How many houses do you need? How much do you actually need? But that's really what we face. 60 Minutes won't ask the tough questions anymore, will pull stories, and it's all because that Trump put the right person ahead of the FCC and manipulated the system to get control over what 60 Minutes does.
Well, it's getting more and more alarming, and it's sad to see this, because CBS was one of the great networks at one point, one of the great news organizations. So, Lance, thank you so much for that report. And we will be back next week with Lisa Haber to talk about the school district and the school facilities. We'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.